Welcome back. Monday, May 29 marks 2 years of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, and here on Channels Television this week focuses on the economy, business, investment and the markets under the present administration. And joining me now in the studio to look at the macro and micro economy is an economist and a senior partner at B. Adedipe and Associates, Dr. Biodo Adedipe. Thank you very much for joining us. Even with the rains, it didn't stop you from coming.
Thank you for having me here.
Right. So how would you say Nigeria's economy has fared under this administration 2 years after?
Well, we situate the story in context. In context, one, of how we got to where we are, and talking about where they took over, and then how the journey has been between then and now. Now, primarily, looking back at how we got to May 2015, I situated it in terms of 5 main issues, which have been the major problems of this economy over the decades, not even years now. Now, the first is that we have had a monocultural economy, which has not changed, depending so much on hydrocarbons for our foreign earnings. And so that gave the impression that we don't have a diversified economy, which of course again is a misunderstanding of the structure of the economy. For by the time you look at the contributions of different sectors to our GDP, you see clearly that the economy in actual fact is diversified. So where the problem is our foreign earnings, where we depend on hydrocarbons to the extent of about 97% of our foreign earnings. And that also underscores the fact of the trouble we got into. Because once that particular element is affected, either in terms of the quantity you produce and export, or in terms of the price in the international markets, immediately your earnings are affected. And because that is what you depend upon so much, it again affects everything. Secondly, is that over the years and decades, we suffer from policy inconsistency and in fact, very unpleasant reversals. I call that rigidities, okay? So in which case you find that time over time, one government calls it a policy, before you fully implement and see the impact of it, which in fact raises another dimension. We don't measure impact. Rather, what we talk about are the symbols, the symptoms, and the effects, rather than the impact of such policies. Then also leakages. I mean, that is well celebrated. We all know that. Corruption and the rest of it. Then, of course, there's also low productivity. Okay? Wherein you find that, yes, agric contributes a lot to our GDP, but very low in terms of productivity. So you find then that the real value you bring out from what we do is not commensurate with the effort and resources we invest in them. Now, coming to that point in time, we suffered a downturn in the price of crude oil. Again, we had some restiveness in the Niger Delta, which affected production and export. So our earnings dampened. Now, because we had no buffer in terms of external reserves, we could not take advantage of that reserve as we did in 2008, 2009 to weather the storm of that crisis. So the crisis hit us at a time we had no buffer. And so when that happened, everything began to go southward. So before we also could really settle down into that, first half of 2016, the economy slipped into technical recession. Now, one thing also most analysts get wrong about recession is that recession is a phase in the business cycle. And that phase is the one that precedes a slump, which is followed by recovery. So what normally economists recommend to any government is that, look, once your economy slips into recession, government must restart activities by spending. Because the real issue with recession is that everybody stops spending.
But are they doing it now?
Now, equally, and I deliberately want to point this out, maybe even people in government are not aware of it, and that is why they are not talking about it. If you look at Nigeria in the last 10 years, in fact, the preceding 10 years, there is no single year that any government spent up to 1.2 trillion naira in capital expenditure spending within one budget cycle. That happened in the last 1 year, 2016. Despite that, we started very late, June 2016. So now, that in fact we see is a major spike in terms of, let me call it spark of activities, because now You see construction companies back on the road. And somehow we've been able also to get our bearing in terms of managing the FX shortages that we had. But in any case, that is also coming on the back of what has become favorable to us. We just discussed the oil market. Okay? Price has become favorable above our budget assumption. Also, we are producing steadily now and exporting. And of course, with the window of, let me call it excuse, that OPEC gave us. So now what this all came together to do is to enable Nigeria build our external reserves. About $31 billion. That's about half of the peak we ever achieved in our history. So now, most analysts also lose sight of that. That in the midst of all of this, we grew our external reserves to about 50% of the historical peak in Nigeria since independence. Okay? Now, look at that figure also and divide by our monthly import bill. You will get about 11.94 months. That's above the minimum required in order for you to stabilize the exchange value of your currency. So when people also come out and say that, oh, the current intervention central bank is doing is not sustainable, I laugh at it. Because sustainability is a function of how many months of your import bills the external reserves can fund. Which means if we don't sell oil today, if we don't export anything from Nigeria for the next 12 months, our external reserves as at today can pay the bill. Okay? So it then means when you look at this all together, in my own interpretation, the Buhari administration has done the right thing any sensible government should do when the economy is in recession. Okay. And the picture is also clear in the chart. Now, most analysts also wrongly interpret data by looking at the point data. I mean, you hear people make comment that, oh, first quarter 2017, the GDP shrank by 0.52%. But did they lay that against the trend?
Yeah.
If you actually look at the trend, which I have a chart on,
there's an improvement.
It actually shows that this economy is already climbing out of recession. We've climbed 2 successive quarters. We climbed in the first quarter of this year, and then the last quarter of 2016, if you see the chart. So if you follow that trend, it's very obvious. Now, next quarter we should be out of the negative zone.
You talked about budgetary increase in budgetary spending.
That's right.
Or capital expenditure and all that. But then the issues seem to have always remained implementation.
Yeah.
Do you think that this government has done anything different in terms of implementing budget, monitoring the implementation of the budget?
Yeah, what I've seen different this time around is something I've always canvassed and advocated over the years. And that is, we should come to a point when we talk about our budget, not only in terms of the amount naira-wise, but in terms of what that money is supposed to deliver. So when I saw a budget prepared by this administration, and they came out and said, look, for the Power, Works and Housing Ministry, the expectation is that the first budget cycle they will run through is to deliver over 2,000 kilometers of roads. And that made a lot of sense to me. In which case, we are not measuring how much money we spent. We are measuring what we're able to deliver with that money. Now, I've seen them take that direction. And what you need to do is to encourage the government to maintain that direction. Which means it should not come at the end of the year and tell us how much was spent per se. Like the finance minister told us, I think sometime last week, that yes, over the 2016 budget cycle, the government had released 1.2 trillion naira for capital expenditure. Great, right direction. But we want to know exactly what we delivered with that. How many kilometers of roads? What did we do about education, health, and the rest of it? In which case, talking about infrastructure primarily, and not capital expenditure in terms of cars, all right, in terms of tables and chairs. So, because all of those are also capital items anyway. So we want to see the things that will drive economic activities.
Right. Now, put all of this that you have talked about, the achievement this present administration has, perhaps come up with, to the assessment of the international community, like investors, rating agencies, like Fitch, Moody's, and of course the IMF report and World Bank report, outlook on Nigeria.
Now, that's an area I also find interesting. Now, why I say that is this. November 2016, I had done a projection that the Nigerian economy will go into recovery in 2017. Now, the IMF